Hi everybody. So this week's video is about conflict again, and we're going to start where we finished off on our call the other night, and we're going to take it through and dig deeper into what you can actually do when you're confronted with conflict, and then we're going to explore that whole concept of secondary gain that we touched on, because it's critical to understanding conflict and how to deal with it with the longer term. So let's start off by looking at conflict. In the last video, we talked about how our focus needs to be on de-escalating the conflict. We need to reduce that threat response to get people back in their prefrontal cortex so we can continue the conversation. How do we do that? And we started looking at that a little bit in the Zoom call. But fundamentally, there is a process, and it starts with acknowledgement. The very first thing you need to do is to defuse the emotions of the situation. So as soon as you sense there's threat there, especially if it's aimed at you, one of the key things to do is to acknowledge how the other person is feeling, acknowledge their point of view, and in a way validate what they're feeling and their experience. Now, the skill in this comes from when you're trying to acknowledge without necessarily agreeing with someone. Okay? So, for example, if someone says to me, this whole project idea is ridiculous, it's never going to work, I'm not going to acknowledge by saying, yeah, I agree, it's never going to work. What I'm going to do is I can see that there are definitely some challenges with making this happen. What I need to do next is reframe the conversation we're having to change it from a conflict-based conversation to a collaborative conversation. So, for example, I could say, that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you about it or bring it to this meeting, because we need to unpick the challenges, make sure it's feasible, and really go into the nitty-gritty of how to make this work before we start doing anything. So you see, by acknowledging that their perspective is valid, well, we certainly need to make sure it works. That's what this meeting's for. Reframing the purpose of the conversation from, I'm here to push this on you, to, well, we're here to explore and work together to find out what the challenges are. Will it work? How can we make it work? What are the pros and cons of it? I mean, we've done an initial analysis and presented our ideas to you, so we think it's worth pursuing. But that's exactly what this team is together for now, is to see how we can make it work safely and without disrupting the rest of our business. Now, a key element to remember when we're dealing with conflict is the fact that the threat is a response to a threat to safety. Okay? So the more in our reframing of the situation and the conversation, the more in the reframing we can make it about safety, the better. So we want to acknowledge and reframe, and then we can ask a question to get the conversation going within the new reframing. So it would be, I don't understand why we're looking at this project. It'll never work. We've already discussed it lots of times. I go, well, that's exactly, you're absolutely right. We don't want to be spending time on something that's not going to work, and that's why we've brought it to this meeting, for us all to look at it and see how it will work, if it will, what the challenges are, and how we can move forward safely with it. And that's why we're here. And that's why I've allocated 90 minutes for this meeting, to make sure we can really get into the nitty-gritty of it. So it's great that it sounds like you're already seeing some things about it that will make it challenging. Let's start by capturing some of those. Flip chart up. What are some of the challenges with making this project work? Boom, and start capturing them. But do it from the group if you're in a group. Do it on the flip chart paper so they know they're being heard, or at the very least write the notes down and prove to them that you're taking the notes and they're being heard. All of this will lower their conflict level. Okay? So that's an example of how we can use the acknowledgement, the reframe, and a question. And this is where the skill comes in. Now, I've had many years of training and many years of practicing this model, so I can almost do it off the top of my head. But what I'd like you to think about are some scenarios, and I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, and what I want you to do is think, if that happened to me, how could I defuse it with an acknowledgement, reframe the situation, and end with a question? Okay. So, and you have to use your imagination a little bit because obviously these are going to be fairly generic examples. So example number one is a family member, probably not terribly close to, comes to you and says, I can't believe you posted that on Facebook. That's really upset me. And I think it just shows, I just don't want anything to do with you anymore. That, reframe it and ask a question. And you posted something fairly innocuous about something and didn't realize that it would actually impact this family member. I'll give you an example. I shared something about a very high functioning autistic comedian, and a friend of mine who has a very severely autistic son really took offense at it and really had a go at me about how dare I post that and pretend that autism is wonderful and not show respect for the suffering she's been through with her son. Okay, so there's an example. Example two, I'd like you to think of a workplace situation where there's a conflict. So it could be you're suggesting an idea and someone's saying, no, that just won't work. I mean, that's a ridiculous idea. We've never done it that way and it's never going to work. We've always done it this way. Let's just keep doing what we're doing because at least we know this works to some extent. It's too risky to do that. Okay. And then the third one I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about a situation where your partner actually says to you, that is a ridiculous idea. There's no way that's going to happen. And it's something you feel quite strongly about. So it might be about a career choice, deciding to write a book, deciding to do an art class. But they're basically saying your idea is stupid and they're in conflict. Now, the reason I've chosen these three examples is because they're often the most challenging ones for being able to acknowledge, to defuse, reframe, and question. So they're really good for thinking through how you might practice this. Okay. You can also practice this every day. Now, the other little tip to think about is when we're thinking about the reframe, we're reframing to remove the threat, remember, to make the person feel safe. The more we know about the scarf pillars, the better for the person. Is it their status, their certainty, their autonomy, their relatedness, or the fairness pillars that's been wobbled, which 2 or 3? And see if you can hit those in your reframe. Okay, you might be able to hit all of them. Well, that's exactly why I brought this idea to you, because I knew you'd have the insights to see what might or might not work. And we need to be certain that whatever we do is going to work. I also want to make sure that you have a key role in this and that you take a lead, which is why you have to be certain. And you're a part of the team and everything's done in a very transparent way. Now, that's my first rough attempt at hitting every pillar in an acknowledgement or a reframe. So that's how we can actually handle a conflict. Now, what I wanted to spend the second half of this video exploring was moving a bit deeper into the secondary gain aspect, because that's what we'll be looking at more in the next call that we have. So I want to look at it now, and then you can have some questions on the group, and I can answer those in the following video, because I think this concept of secondary gain is really important. We're going to look at secondary gain here, and then what we're going to look at in the next video is we'll look at the theory of self-affirmation, because it's related to secondary gain. Otherwise, this video will be 20 minutes long. So secondary gain is a psychological construct that's been used to explain people's behaviour. So we have primary gains and secondary gains. The primary gain is kind of the obvious one, the main one, the one that's usually visible. So the gain in me taking this new day job, which is going to use up a lot of my time, the primary gain is that income, that relief from financial challenge, etc. And it will lead to a little bit of freedom of weekends, etc. So, however, part of my brain is going, I don't really want to do it. And I know there's a risk of self-sabotage. And if you ever see self-sabotage, or sense it in yourself, it's because there's a secondary gain. The secondary gain I get from not doing that job is I have time to do my art, I have time to do my horses, I have time to do other things. I have that time freedom. I have the autonomy. I think I've mentioned that autonomy is really big for me. So you see the pillars come into this. Okay. And if I could actually get by, I'd probably prefer not to work full time, because I could then do my art, do this course, do other things, and have that whole self-contained autonomy that I want. Now, the risk is that if I am not very careful in how I handle this, I'll start doing the full-time job, I'll start resenting it, and that'll start showing up in my work, and I'll start self-sabotaging. How do I deal with this? Well, luckily with self-awareness, you can handle this. First of all, you can look at it through your parent-adult-child dynamic. Which one is that that's doing that? It's my rebellious child who's getting upset at losing the free time. Also, the parent's going, but you should do this. And as soon as that happens, that triggers my rebellious child. That's my autonomy streak. But if I can get into the adult mode and reframe things. So here's the thing. Over the last few weeks when I haven't been working full time and I haven't had a day job, how much art have I done? How much other stuff have I done? How much of all those things that I want my free time for have I actually done? Very little. Because the financial pressure and concerns have been blocking me. So therefore, if my adult sits there and goes, do you know what? I'm going to reframe this. At 5:30 every day, you're clocked off and you've got the whole evening, and you know you like working in the evenings, and you've got all weekend with no stress to do these other things. And you know what else? You've got some money to invest in them. You can buy new art materials. You can go to an art class. You can, and I just feel myself getting excited as I'm saying this. So in a way, secondary gain goes well with conflict because it is actually an internal conflict. You've got your conscious mind going, this is the win. But your unconscious mind is going, yes, but you're going to lose something by doing that. And the way to deal with it is to acknowledge it and reframe it, exactly the same as we're dealing with conflict with others. Now, secondary gain tends to have a few main drivers. So a key driver is safety. I mean, that's true of everybody. A key driver of secondary gain is safety. And this is particularly important if you're asking people to change what they're doing. And it seems perfectly logical to you that that change should happen and it will have positive outcomes. But the fact is, people know where they are. If certainty is important to them in particular, this will strengthen this. And we're safe where we are. It might not be very enjoyable, but it's very safe. If I go out into the unknown, uncertainty, I don't know how safe that is. I'm taking a risk. So however logical the change is, how safe is it going to be? Now, the great thing is if we can diagnose what the secondary gain is, we can come up with things to deal with it. So, for example, if I know my reluctance to start my own business and start this confident leader journey is because it's risky and I might end up investing a lot of time and effort and nobody will be interested, and then I'll be upset and disappointed, and I want to avoid that. What can I do? I can do things in very small steps. I can do a taster program to see if people like it, and then people want to sign up. I can do a founder initial program, so I've got a little more leeway on it and make sure it really works before I go and launch it out to the big population where it has to be professional and proper, although obviously I will get it there for you guys. So by making it safe, I remove the threat, which then means I can move forward to the primary gain. Right, so the secondary gain concept is really important because it's an issue of where the conscious battles with the unconscious. And the reason we're tackling it here and now is because we need a certain level of self-awareness before we can even deal with the concept of secondary gain. We need to be able to recognize it in ourselves, and we need to be able to recognize it in others. So if you're sitting there going, I have no idea why they're behaving that way, they're behaving that way because there's a value in it to them. And if we can work out what that value is, we can then have a conversation and deal with it. Now, it works for ourselves. I don't know why I keep self-sabotaging. I don't know why I keep procrastinating. There's a secondary gain. When I realized that my procrastination was not laziness or idleness or anything or things like that, but was actually because I had a massive desire to be perfect. And therefore, if I left it a bit longer and I knew a bit more, it would be better and closer to perfect. And it was actually a drive for perfectionism that was causing me to procrastinate and fail in a lot of the things I was doing. Really interesting. See, my dad is a craftsman and very much into doing things right and well. And so I had to develop a good enough kind of voice in my head in order to do things. Perfectionism's still there, still drives me nuts occasionally, but I don't allow it to sabotage the good enough. Perfectionism can be the enemy of progress. So your assignment from here is, yes, come up with those examples for acknowledging, reframing, and asking a question in a conflict situation, in those conflict situations. But the other thing I'd like you to think about is this concept of secondary gain. In the next video, we'll be linking it to Claude Steele's self-affirmation theory and showing a bit more detail about how it works. But what I'd really like you to think about is, think of someone who you're like, I don't know why they're doing that. And using SCARF as a framework, think about what the secondary gain is of their behavior. What are they getting from it? Are they getting status? Are they getting certainty? Are they getting autonomy? Are they getting relatedness? Are they getting a perception of fairness? Okay. So that's their big things. They're all to do with the safety element. Okay. So for example, I know a lot of people who go absolutely nuts at any slightest sign of unfairness. They'll become justice warriors, etc. And actually, that's not so much about fairness, but status, because then they get recognized as being justice warriors and they get the attention and recognition that they crave. This is a big thing. Think about with children, animals. When they do the wrong thing, they often get attention. No, stop that, don't do that. And we go and grab them, we move them away, we interact with them, whereas we've been ignoring them for the previous hour and a half. So actually, they have a gain from misbehaving. It's not conscious, but they have a gain from it. Might be negative attention, but it's still attention. The way to do that is to switch it around. So if we understand what the secondary gain is, we can find another way of meeting it. If the gain or need is attention, we can give that proactively. And then we avoid the negative behavior. We'll go more into this on the self-affirmation page. Any questions, post them in the group. I'm going to pop this video up hidden on YouTube and send a link to you guys so you can find it with the link. And I think that would be a good repository, and that way it'll be able to go up on the portal as well. So I hope you find this interesting. We'll do a video on self-affirmation theory and a little bit more digging into secondary gain in the next video next week. Okay, take care. Have a good weekend.